Retirement was supposed to feel like freedom, like finally catching your breath after swimming too far out for too long. But as I stood backstage at Lakeview High's auditorium, fiddling with the pearl necklace my daughter Emily gave me, all I felt was exposed. The room was full of people: teachers, former students, the superintendent, the custodian who once found my car keys in the vending machine, long story, and neighbors I hadn't seen since the PTA days. Balloons floated lazily over the dessert table. A banner read, "Congratulations, Charlotte Myers, 32 years of service." It should have felt like a celebration. But I kept tugging at my sleeves, glancing toward the entrance every few minutes. Not because I expected anything dramatic, just habit. 32 years of scanning rooms to make sure everything was in order, everyone accounted for, every stray thread of chaos tied down. Maybe it was how Mom always said, family takes care of family, no matter the cost to one member. Or maybe it was my own belief that if I carried enough, if I was strong enough, everyone else could stay standing. That responsibility was how you showed love, even if no one loved me back that way. Maybe I kept doing it because somewhere deep down, I believed being needed meant I mattered. Emily walked up with 2 cups of punch and handed me one, smiling nervously. "You okay?" "I'm fine," I lied, my go-to phrase for the past 3 decades. She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear and looked out over the crowd. "You know, they all came because they love you. Even Mr. Randall from facilities. He brought you a thermos." I chuckled softly. He's always had a soft spot for me. I used to leave him muffins in the break room. "You really did everything for this place," she said, her voice suddenly tight. "And for us, for the family." That word hung there. Family. I nodded, eyes drifting again to the double doors of the auditorium. She noticed. "You think she'll come?" I shrugged. "Michelle loves a stage." Emily bit her lip and said nothing. My sister Michelle and I hadn't spoken properly in 3 years. Even before that, our conversations were like walking on ice in too thin shoes. She had always been the one who burned bright and fast: 3 failed business ventures, 2 messy divorces, and 1,000 borrowed excuses. When our mother got sick, Michelle visited exactly twice. I didn't even get a thank you after the funeral, just a text that said, "Glad it's over." Still, I took care of her, covered her credit card bills once, paid her rent for 6 months, said nothing when she borrowed money from our mother's savings and never paid it back, because that's what I did, what everyone expected me to do. I sometimes wondered if Michelle's resentment came not from my failures, but from my stability. Her ventures fizzled while I stayed steady. Maybe, deep down, she hated that I kept everything running while she chased whatever came next. I loved her, but she saw my reliability as judgment, a silent spotlight on her instability. It's not that Michelle didn't try. It's just that every time she failed, when her boutique collapsed, when her candle business tanked, when her second marriage crumbled, someone was there to soften the fall, usually me. And in some twisted corner of her mind, I think she blamed me for being the net she always resented falling into. "It's time," Emily whispered, gently nudging me toward the stage. I squeezed her hand and walked out into the lights. The applause was warm. I smiled as former students waved, some holding signs. A math teacher gave me a bouquet. The principal shook my hand like I'd just saved a school bus full of children. I stood at the podium, heart pounding, and began my speech. "Thank you," I said, surprised at how shaky my voice sounded. "Not just for being here today, but for being part of my story. This school has been my second home, sometimes my first." A gentle laugh. I paused. When I started here, I was a 29-year-old single mother just trying to keep the lights on and the fridge stocked. I never imagined I'd stay this long. Or that the hardest goodbyes wouldn't be the ones at graduation, but the ones I had to say quietly, in the middle of ordinary days, to students who never came back, to teachers who moved on, and yes, to the parts of myself I buried along the way to keep going. I glanced at Emily, who looked like she might cry. I smiled and kept going. If I leave anything behind, I hope it's this. You can be kind and strong. You can be quiet and still powerful. And most of all, you can make a difference even if no one ever puts your name on the front page. More applause. I was about to step down when the doors creaked open. Michelle. She strode in like she was fashionably late to a red carpet. Oversized sunglasses, a designer scarf. Her smile was wide, but her eyes scanned the room with something colder, calculating. Emily stiffened beside me. Michelle took a seat in the front row, crossed her legs, and raised her hand. "Mind if I say a few words?" The mic was still warm in my hand. I hesitated. Emily whispered, "You don't have to." But I nodded slowly. "Of course." I handed the mic to Michelle. As she stood, an anxious silence fell over the room. Emily looked momentarily panicked, but Michelle was already heading quickly toward the microphone. She smiled sweetly, and I braced for impact. Michelle always knew how to work a room. She didn't inherit Mom's grace or Dad's work ethic, but she got charm in spades, and a cutting instinct sharper than any blade. As she stood behind the microphone, her smile wide and practiced, I felt my stomach coil like a tape measure pulled too tight. "Charlotte," she began, her voice honeyed, "you've always been the steady one, the glue, the fixer." A few people chuckled politely. And today, I think it's time we all recognize that. There was a pause. A flicker of hope bloomed in my chest. Maybe she had changed. Maybe the years apart gave her perspective. Maybe she... Because being the fixer, she continued, her tone shifting like a knife turning in its sheath, also means you're the one who hides the cracks, the one who holds power over the broken pieces, and sometimes you use that power to keep people small. The hope curdled. I felt Emily's hand grab mine. "Mom, don't listen," she whispered, leaning closer. Michelle launched into a polished anecdote about childhood. At first, it was harmless. A story about me double-checking her homework, about how I color-coded her closet once. People laughed. They thought it was sweet. Then she shifted. But what happens when the fixer doesn't want to let anyone else fix themselves? When she doesn't trust anyone else to step up? The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Mrs. Gable from the PTA shifted uncomfortably, avoiding eye contact. Young Mr. Evans, a teacher I'd mentored, looked genuinely confused. But across the room, Aunt Carol nodded almost imperceptibly, a flicker of old resentment in her eyes. What happens when the hero complex becomes a leash, when the kindness becomes a cage? I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. Michelle leaned into the microphone, eyes scanning the crowd, seeking validation. She smiled at the audience, gesturing like she was sharing some great moral insight. "She paid my rent once," she said, voice sharpening with performative outrage. "A low point. I was broke. She wrote the check, but she also left a sticky note on my fridge that said, 'Be responsible this time.'" Gasps. "She called it love. I called it control." Emily let out a soft, strangled noise. I squeezed her hand, spine straightening despite the tremble in my ribs. Michelle wasn't done. Her voice rose, more pointed now, like she was daring me to respond. "She talks about strength, about sacrifice, but what kind of strength always needs to be the martyr? What kind of sacrifice demands a spotlight? Maybe she didn't fix things. Maybe she just needed to feel superior." I looked out at the audience, faces I knew, some confused, some uncomfortable, some, to my horror, nodding. Michelle finished with a final smirk, voice tight and biting. So yes, Charlotte held it together, but maybe she held it too tight. Maybe she didn't let anyone else grow. She stepped down from the stage to scattered, awkward claps. Not applause. Not quite. I felt hollow, like someone had cracked open a part of my life and poured cold water inside, like the time I pawned Grandma's locket to pay Michelle's overdue tuition, a secret I'd buried. And now she used me as a stepping stone in front of a crowd. But I stood, walked slowly back to the mic, not because I wanted revenge, but because I had one last breath in me, one last piece of myself to give. I used to think that being the strong one meant you never dropped anything, never needed help, never said no. The room was pin-drop silent. The heat of the stage lights soaked into my skin. Michelle's perfume still hung faintly in the air like a reminder. But strength isn't silence, it's honesty and grace. I turned to Michelle, my voice calm but unwavering. I did help you, and I was scared that if I didn't, you'd fall, that if I stopped fixing everything, no one else would start. She flinched, just slightly, as if the word fear was unexpected. Her hands tightened on her clutch. That sticky note? It wasn't judgment. It was fear. Fear that if I didn't leave it, I wouldn't know how to stop watching out for you. I turned back to the audience. Yes, I held too tightly, but I did it because no one else offered to hold anything, but that burden ends today. I let the words sit, let the air fill back in, and then someone at the back of the room started clapping, slowly at first, then more decisively, then another and another. Soon the entire room rose to their feet in a standing ovation that sounded like wind rushing through trees. Loud, uncontrollable, real. Michelle sat down, her face unreadable. Her weaponized smile faded. And I stood there, not as the fixer, not the martyr, just a woman who finally stopped apologizing for the weight she carried. And that's when I realized, sometimes the spotlight doesn't burn. Sometimes it shines where it should have been all along. The standing ovation faded, but the vibrations of it clung to me like static. I stepped off the stage and sat next to Emily, her eyes still glossy, her fingers curling tightly into mine. Her voice barely broke the air. "I'm proud of you." I nodded, but my mind wasn't in the room anymore. It was unraveling behind me. In echoes, Michelle's accusations, the flickers of doubt in the eyes of people I'd once trusted, the ache in my chest that still hadn't dulled. That night, I didn't go home right away. Emily offered, but I told her I needed a walk. The city buzzed around me, honking cars, late-night diners laughing too loudly, neon lights flickering like unreliable memories. I found myself at the park near the church, the same park where Michelle and I used to play freeze tag. I sat on the old bench beneath the sycamore tree, stared out into the empty grass, and wondered why even victory could feel like grief. Because something had shifted in me up there. I'd spoken, I'd told the truth, but in doing so, I cracked something open that I'd kept shut for decades. When I got home, there was a message from Mom. "Michelle's upset. Just talk to her, okay? You're the older one. Be the example." I deleted it, without replying. The guilt came, heavy and familiar. Like a blanket I'd lived under so long, it felt like part of my skin. 2 days later, Michelle posted a picture. A selfie, her eyes red-rimmed, captioned, "Some wounds aren't visible. Some betrayals don't leave bruises. Some sisters love control more than family." 100 likes, a string of sympathy comments. I stared at the screen, unsure if I wanted to throw my phone or cry into it. Instead, I powered it off. It didn't matter. The text came anyway. From Aunt Carol. "I know you think you did the right thing, but did you have to do it so publicly? You humiliated her." From Cousin Lisa. "Why air dirty laundry? Families keep things in-house." From an old neighbor. "I didn't know you two had problems. Hope you're both okay." I wanted to scream. Where were these people when I drained my savings to keep Michelle afloat? When I babysat her daughter during finals week, or paid for her therapist when she couldn't? Where were they when I swallowed my pride every time Michelle insulted me with a joke too sharp to be funny? They hadn't seen those things. They'd only seen the spotlight. And Michelle, ever the performer, knew how to turn it. It all built to Sunday. Church. I hadn't planned to go, but Emily asked me to. "If you don't show up, they'll write the ending for you," she said. So I wore my navy dress, tied my hair back, and stepped into the sanctuary like a soldier walking into the last battle. The whispers started before the first hymn, glances over shoulders, lips that stopped moving when I passed. Even Pastor Wilkins, who had once called me a pillar of grace, avoided my eyes. Michelle arrived late, as always, dressed in pale blue, a soft scarf around her neck like she was the one who'd been bruised. At the end of the service, during the announcements, she raised her hand. Before we close, she said sweetly, I just want to thank everyone who reached out this week. It's been a painful time. Family wounds cut deep. People murmured support. She glanced toward me. Her voice cracked, perfectly. But I believe in forgiveness. And I believe in keeping families together. So I want to say, I forgive you, Charlotte, for what you said, for how you said it. Gasps. One person even clapped. I didn't move, didn't blink. Forgive me? When the final song began, I slipped out the side door and walked until my heels blistered. Back home, I poured tea with shaking hands. Michelle had stolen the narrative, again, turned herself into the victim, again. That night, I wrote a letter, not to Michelle, not to the church, to myself. You are not selfish for setting boundaries. You are not cruel for refusing to carry what others drop at your feet. You are not wrong for speaking aloud what others only whisper. I folded the letter and placed it in the drawer with old cards from Emily, photos of my late father, and the sticky note Michelle once called controlling. I kept it all, not for bitterness, but for memory. 3 weeks passed. The storm began to settle. People stopped talking. Michelle found another narrative to champion, a school fundraiser, an injury her dog sustained. She moved on. She always did. But I didn't forget. Because every now and then, I'd pass by the church bulletin board, see a photo from that day, and feel the knot in my chest tighten again. Until one afternoon, a woman named Rhonda, someone I barely knew who'd been at the brunch, stopped me in the grocery store parking lot. You probably don't want to hear this, she said awkwardly, but I saw you that day. I saw how calm you were, how you didn't yell, didn't sink to anything. You just told the truth, and it stuck with me, thank you. She walked away before I could answer, but in that moment I felt it. Some echoes fade. Others become the soundtracks for someone else's awakening. And I wasn't hollow anymore. It was a small envelope, cream-colored, no return address. Just my name in looping script across the front. Inside, a brass key and a folded note that smelled faintly of lavender and something else older. I opened it slowly, like peeling back a layer of skin. Thought you might want this back. It's the key to the guest room. Used to be yours. Still has your posters on the wall, if you ever feel like coming home. Mom. Home. The words sat in my mouth like a stone. That room hadn't been mine in years. It had been converted into Michelle's yoga studio, then a storage space, then a shrine to someone else's version of family. Now apparently it was ready for my return. Emily found me staring at the note. Are you okay? She asked gently. I held the key up by its worn loop. Do you think this is an apology? She tilted her head. I think it's fear. Of what happens if you never come back. We were standing in my kitchen, 2 mugs between us, the soft hum of the dishwasher behind. I looked at the key again. I didn't know what unsettled me more, the idea that they'd changed the locks on me a long time ago, or the quiet invitation to step back in, like none of it had happened. The weight wasn't in the brass, but in the what-ifs it represented. The family I'd always craved, not the one I actually had. I placed the key in the drawer. Shut it. Didn't lock it. But I didn't reach for it again either. The next time I saw Michelle was at the community charity dinner. She wasn't supposed to be there. But Michelle always appeared where the cameras did. She wore a crimson blouse, bold lipstick, and an aura of carefully curated pain. Charlotte, she said, her smile pinned on like a brooch. You look rested. You look busy, I replied. I am, she said brightly. Between Haley's school, Mom's new meds, and sorting out the bake sale committee, I feel like I barely have time to breathe. But you know how it is. You taught me everything about giving too much. There it was, the compliment made of glass shards. I nodded once. And you've always been a quick study. Her eyes narrowed, just a flicker. Then she leaned closer, lowering her voice. You didn't need to drag it out in public, you know. You could have just talked to me. The same old script. Turned dependence into my failing. I blinked. You talked at me for 30 years. I figured it was my turn. She stepped back, lips pursed. Mom's worried about you. Tell her I'm fine. She says you've changed. Good. I was tired of being useful. She opened her mouth, then closed it. I walked away, not in anger, but with a profound weariness. The battle wasn't worth fighting anymore. Weeks passed. Then came the snow. It started early that year, thick, slow flakes drifting like feathers from a sky too quiet to trust. Emily and I made soup, read books. I crocheted a scarf that unraveled twice before it started to make sense. Mom called once, left a message. Michelle's not doing well, says she misses you. Haley's been asking about her Aunt Charlie. Maybe we could all do dinner sometime. The manipulation was so transparent now. The familiar guilt pricked at me, but this time, it didn't take root. It felt foreign, like an old coat that no longer fit. I didn't respond. Not because I didn't miss Haley, but because I'd finally learned that guilt makes a poor seasoning for reconciliation. Christmas Eve. The guest room key was still in the drawer. I took it out, not to use it, just to look at it. Let it sit in my palm. It was cold, smooth, oddly light for how heavy it felt. For a heartbeat, I pictured the Saturn poster, the scent of cedar in the closet, a ghost of belonging. But the warmth of the tea in my hands, the quiet rhythm of Emily breathing in the next room, the weight of my own key in my pocket, that was real. That was home. Mailing it back wasn't just returning metal, it was posting back a role I no longer fit. I placed the key in a box, taped it shut, mailed it back. No note, just returned to sender. It was just after New Year's when the knock came. Not the insistent kind, not the neighbor with a package kind. A hesitant one. 3 taps, then silence. I opened the door to find Evelyn. My mother stood there in a winter coat that looked too big for her, or maybe she looked smaller, shoulders hunched, makeup carefully applied, but the eyes, they didn't lie anymore. "Hi," she said. Her voice was raw. "I didn't want to call. I thought you might hang up." She was probably right. I stepped aside without speaking. Not because I forgave her, but because I didn't want this conversation to happen on my doorstep. I handed her a mug of tea. She held it like she was afraid it might vanish. "I got your package," she said. "The key." I nodded. She set the tea down. "It was never really your room again after you left. I think I knew that, but I kept the posters up." "It's okay," I said. "No, it's not," she replied quickly. Her eyes welled. "I left you out, Charlotte. At the reading. And before that. You gave everything to this family, and I let Michelle take more. I let everyone take more." The words landed softly this time, not like a blow, but like a stone finally dropped into a deep well, an admission, decades late. She wiped her cheek. "I wasn't brave enough to stop the cycle, and you were." I didn't know what to say to that. I still didn't trust that she fully understood, but it didn't feel manipulative now. It felt human. She pulled something from her purse, an old photograph, worn at the edges, 2 girls on a swing set, one pushing, one flying, Michelle's face beaming mid-air, mine blurry, mid-laugh. "I found it in the old box. Thought maybe you'd want it." I glanced at the photo, 2 smiling girls oblivious to the diverging paths ahead, a relic from a different narrative. I set it aside, gently. "I miss you," she said. "I miss hearing your voice." She missed the sound of my voice, perhaps, but had she ever truly missed me? I smiled faintly. "I'm still here, just somewhere else now." She nodded. "I understand." When she left, I didn't cry, I didn't shake, I didn't feel triumphant either, just still. That night, I sat with Emily by the fireplace. She rested her head on my shoulder. "Did it feel like closure?" she asked. "Not exactly," I said. "More like the end of a chapter I don't need to reread." Emily nodded. "I'm proud of you." I looked around our home. Small, quiet, full of laughter and silence that didn't hurt. And I knew I'd built something real. There would be more visits, more invitations I might decline, more messages I might not answer. But that didn't mean I was running. It meant I was rooted somewhere new. Forgiveness, I realized, wasn't about reunion. It was about releasing the need for anything more. I kept the photograph, not for nostalgia, but to remind myself of the girl I once was, the one who learned to laugh even when no one pushed the swing. And I promised that girl, never again would she be the only one holding up the world. That door had closed with grace. No room for doors that only open one way. Only windows, letting the light move freely in and out. Spring came slowly, not with fanfare, but in small acts of defiance. Buds on the maple outside our window, birds testing their morning songs again. The snow receded 1 inch at a time, as if unsure whether it was safe to melt. So did I. There were no dramatic reunions, no sudden changes of heart. Evelyn called sometimes. Once to ask about a recipe she remembered I liked. Once just to say hello. Michelle didn't call. I didn't expect her to. But I had stopped expecting things from people who only noticed my silence when they needed something filled. Instead, I learned to notice myself. My laughter, now freer. My hands, no longer clenched. My time, finally mine. I started writing again. Nothing big. Journal entries. Letters I never intended to send. A few paragraphs about a woman who found herself by finally losing what she never needed. Some days I still felt echoes of the old guilt, of the ache for belonging. But those echoes grew fainter, like sounds muffled behind thick walls. Walls I didn't build this time. I built windows, and through them the light always came.